Right, so this is the 15th edition of Mellow Musings, and we have Professor Anil Prasad, who will be giving us a talk today. And the title is Literature as a Vehicle for Human Rights, Voice, Empathy, and Resistance. This is Professor Anil Prasad. We have known him for the last few years. He's been joining us for our events, for our Mellow Musings, and for some of our conferences also. So he's one of the regulars of Mellow, and we are very happy that he has agreed to give us a talk today. He's a former professor of English, and I asked him for a brief bio, and he made it so brief that it misses out most of the things that he has been doing, most of his achievements. Anyway, this is what he wants you to know. He's a former professor of English who has transitioned into an impactful career as a human rights and social activist. With a background in academia, Prasad has used his expertise in English to foster greater awareness and advocacy for social justice and human rights. As an activist, he works towards promoting equality, justice, and empowerment for marginalized communities. So this is a very, very brief bio, but we know that Professor Prasad has been all over the world, and he's taught in lots of universities internationally. Plus, he is invited to various platforms to give a talk, and I've been following him for the last, about 5-6 years now. And he is really one of those proud academicians that we would love to be connected with. So Professor Prasad, welcome to this session. And we are wondering what you're going to talk about, literature as a vehicle for human rights. Obviously, you're going to refer to some texts also. So we are just waiting to hear you. So over to you, Professor Prasad.
Thank you. And good evening, everyone. I'm sorry for the delay that is caused by my not knowing the things of computer. And I would like to thank Professor Manju Jaidka for inviting me, and for the organizers for inviting me to this important webinar, and for the thoughtful way in which they have prepared today's program. When I first saw the invitation poster, I was struck by the choice of placing Picasso's Guernica just below the theme of our discussion: literature as a vehicle for human rights, voice, empathy, and resistance. This is a profoundly meaningful juxtaposition, I must say. Guernica is not just a painting, it is an artistic scream against the horrors of war and the violation of human dignity. Through its distorted figures, a stark monochrome, and haunting imagery, it becomes a universal language of protest, a visual literature that speaks across time and cultures. Just as Picasso used his art to bear witness, to awaken empathy, and to inspire resistance against oppression, so does literature. Writers, like painters, transform human suffering into a voice that refuses to be silenced. They create spaces where empathy grows and where resistance to injustice becomes not only possible, but necessary. It is in this spirit, the shared power of art and literature to defend human rights, that I wish to begin my talk today. When the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was signed in 1948, the world was still haunted by the memories of fascism, genocide, and war atrocities. Picasso's Guernica, painted in 1937, in response to the Nazi bombing of the Basque town of Guernica during the Spanish Civil War, predates the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but in many ways anticipates its moral and ethical principles. From a human rights perspective, the painting is not merely a historical record, It is a visual narrative with literary value, like a modernist novel stripped of plot but heavy with symbolism. Guernica deploys metaphor, character, and mood to bear witness to violations of human dignity. Article 3 of Universal Declaration of Human Rights declares the right to life, liberty, and security of person. Article 5 prohibits torture and cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. In Guernica, the twisted bodies, the screaming mother with a dead child, the gored horse, these are visual metaphors for the stripping away of these rights. Picasso doesn't show uniforms, national facts, or battlefields. He focuses entirely on civilization of the civilians, turning the painting into a testimony that war's first victims are often the innocent. Like a literary eyewitness account, Guernica forces the viewer to confront a specific suffering. From a literary standpoint, Guernica is composed like a tragic epic. The bull, unyielding, ambiguous, could symbolize brutality, Spain itself, or the persistence of life of destruction. The horse, the central figure, wounded and writhing, a stand in for the people crushed under war. The light bulb or eye suspended overhead, resembling both an electric lamp and a watchful eye, a possible metaphor for surveillance, divine witness, or the inescapable gaze of history. Just as modernist literature like Virginia Woolf or T.S. Eliot's, they use fractured imagery to suggest moral fragmentation and disintegration. Picasso uses cubist dislocation to embody the breakdown of the human order. One of Guernica's human rights strengths is that it refuses to name the attackers. There is no propaganda. He does not take any side. This transforms it from a Spanish Civil War protest into a universal condemnation of civilian targeting in armed conflict, a violation now codified in 1949 Geneva Conventions and anticipated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights ethos. The literary value here lies in Guernica's openness. Like a great novel, it invites interpretation and reinterpretation across generations and conflicts, making it perpetually relevant. Human rights law is written for courts and governments. Guernica is written for the human heart. It functions like literature in that it builds an emotional vocabulary for empathy, outrage, and mourning. This is why it becomes a global anti-war icon, appearing on posters, in protests, and even covered by Shroud. It is very interesting to note that in United Nations in 2003, when the war was declared against Iraq, when officials feared it would visually condemn the push for the Iraq war, this is the direct example of art's power to intervene in political discourse, the way a human rights novel might by forcing a confrontation with moral consequence. Seen through a human rights perspective, Guernica possesses the same literary value as works like Beloved, Toni Morrison's Beloved, or Diary of Anne Frank. It is a structured act of witness, a symbolic condemnation of injustice, and a moral argument for the sanctity of human life in the language of law. Guernica is evidence. In the language of literature, it is truth. I will add a comparative subsection where Picasso's Guernica is analyzed alongside Morrison's Beloved, or Kingston's The Woman Warrior, or Silko's Ceremony as parallel acts of witnessing in human rights discourse. one through visual language, the others through narrative language. Now, Guernica compresses the experience of atrocity into a single fragmented symbolic moment, similar to how Morrison compresses the memory of slavery into haunting nonlinear storytelling. How the woman warrior uses fragmented personal and cultural memory, just as Guernica uses fragmented form to convey the instability of identity under oppression. How both visual and verbal art transcend their original historical moments to speak to universal human rights violations codified in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Before I begin to give some textual examples, I would like to have a theoretical framework to analyze these texts. Several well-established theoretical frameworks that explain the relationship between human rights and literary creations are there. These frameworks approach the subject from interdisciplinary perspectives, combining literary theory, philosophy, law, cultural studies, and ethics. The first one is law and literary framework. How literature can act as a mirror, a critic, or complement to human rights law. The focus is on justice, ethical imagination, voice of the marginalized. The people who are involved in this are James Boyd White, American law professor, literary critic; Richard Westberg, he is also a professor of law, constitutional law; and Martha Nussbaum, she is a professor of law at the University of Chicago, and they all discuss the role of literature as a narrative, imagination into ethical question. The second one is post-colonial literary theory. That is also a kind of framework to discuss it. The focus is representation of subaltern, cultural erasure, resistance writing, and decolonization of justice. The important people, as we all know, are Edward Said, Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, Homi Bhabha, and they help understand the psychological impact of human rights abuses, interconnected framework that address human suffering, particularly in the context of human rights violations. The third one is cultural and human rights theory, in which we have Joseph Slaughter, a professor at Columbia University, and Upendra Bakshi, a professor of international law and very famous jurist. He was the vice chancellor of Delhi University and other places. The focus areas are human rights as a literary genre, narrative justice, and cultural legitimacy of rights. The next one is testimonial and trauma studies. It provides a space for survival of trauma, the people who suffer from trauma, for modern rights, and it depends on subjectivity. The people who are interested in this, they focus on witnessing, memory, voice, silence, and ethical reading. We have also feminist theory and human rights that critiques gender-based violence, patriarchy, legal issues contributing to discourses on women's rights and human dignity. We have bell hooks, Judith Butler, and Chandra Talpade Mohanty, among so many other people. And the focus is on gender justice, intersectionality, bodily autonomy, and narrative as resistance. Then we have eco, human rights in which people connect the environmental rights with environmental justice, rights of nature, interregional and intergenerational justice, often reflected in eco literature. People who are prominent in this are Rob Nixon, Amitav Ghosh, and Lawrence Buell, who is pioneer in eco-criticism. The focus areas are climate justice, displacement, indigenous rights. Finally, we have critical race theory, in which we have Crenshaw, Kimberly Crenshaw, Toni Morrison, Leslie Marmon Silko, Sandra Cisneros, and the focus areas are race, historical erasure, and narrative justice. These are very important and robust theoretical frameworks that connect human rights and literary creation. Literature not only reflects and critiques the human condition, but also creates imaginative spaces where justice, dignity, and freedom are envisioned and demanded. Before I go to give some actual examples, I would like to briefly discuss one important thing that the literary theorists and human rights scholars and philosophers of ethics have been debating for decades. Creative writing preceding human rights ideals. Long before the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was drafted in 1948, literature was already imagining, dramatizing, and defending values now framed as human rights. Ancient epics like the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Mahabharata, the Odyssey, they all explored dignity, justice, and sanctity of life. Shakespeare's plays also dramatized tyranny, oppression, personal liberty, and so on and so forth. Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin articulated the moral imperative to end slavery decades before international human rights law recognized it as universal right. Number 4. There are 29, 30 universal rights drafted in 1948. Number 4 is about slavery. Storytelling and imaginative literature create the moral language and empathy. We have, I just mentioned 2 works, The Woman Warrior by Kingston and Ceremony by Leslie Marmon Silko. They have employed storytelling as a way to reclaim their land and their indigenous heritage as being Native American and Chinese American. So storytelling is also a very important tool. Since the mid 20th century, human rights framework has influenced how authors write and interpret stories. We have Elie Wiesel's Night and Toni Morrison's Beloved, already mentioned. They engage with human rights discourse. The very existence of globally recognized human rights vocabulary gives authors tools in 20th century to articulate injustice in ways that connect local suffering to universal principles. Human rights law writes the rules, and creative writers, they write the reasons. So this is how I interpret it. For example, in Toni Morrison's Beloved, Toni Morrison's Beloved doesn't tell us slavery in a violation of human dignity as it is stated in Article 4. It makes us feel that the protagonist's trauma, her desperation, her imposition of impossible moral choices. What was the need to kill her own child? Similarly, in Sandra Cisneros' House on a Mango Street, Esperanza's desire to have education to escape poverty is also a case in point. So what I say that stories might inspire moral outrage, but without a framework, there is no guarantee of systemic change. So now I come to the specific examples. For example, I have already furnished Toni Morrison's Beloved, written in 1987, that fictionalized the story of an escaped slave. And but there are other works like Mahashweta Devi's short stories, particularly Draupadi, that talks about the brutal oppression of Adivasi women by a state and military apparatus. We have Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, that is taught as a human rights text in US schools, that invite readers to understand racial injustice through the innocent eyes of a child. Atticus Finch, his defense of Tom Robinson, a black man falsely accused, is an enduring literary critique of systemic racism in the US. Elie Wiesel's Night is a very impactful autobiographical account of Auschwitz and Buchenwald, in which there is emphasis on literature's moral imperative. To quote from The Night, I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation, unquote. Many writers have used literature as a tool of resistance against colonialism, apartheid, patriarchy, and dictatorship. Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Petals of Blood critiques post-independence Kenya for perpetuating the same exploitation and colorful colonial powers. I quote, writers must align themselves with the people and their struggles, unquote. Faiz Ahmad Faiz poetry, Hum Bhi Dekhenge, became an anthem of defiance against military rule. His verses challenged religious tyranny and called for a more humane and just world. Literary narratives often function as archives of trauma and preserving collective memory and demanding justice. Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago, written in 1973, exposed the horrors of Soviet labor camps, shaking the moral conscience of the world. It documented testimonies of over 200 prisoners, making visible a silenced history. In India, in Dalit literature, Om Prakash Valmiki's autobiography, Juthan, is a milestone in Dalit literature. It lays bare caste-based discrimination and the degradation endured by Dalits in India. I quote, Dalit life is exiled from dignity, rights, and even the imagination of mainstream literature, unquote. We have literary pieces that play a role in human rights education. I just mentioned Harper Lee's novel. There is another text by Maya Angelou. For instance, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings has been used in educational program to discuss racial trauma and resilience. The UNESCO publication Teaching Human Rights Through Literature in 2004 suggests including such literary text to cultivate moral imagination. And what I see that the pen is mightier than sword, not merely because it narrates events, but because it dares to reimagine justice. I have, if time permits, some of the poems collected to prove my point. English poetry has long served not only as a mirror of personal and aesthetic experience, but also a vehicle for social conscience. We have William Blake, whose voice protest human tyranny, and he is a voice of human dignity. In Songs of Experience, the lines, oft quoted lines, in every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every band, the mind forged manacles I hear. Shelley's Mask of Anarchy, I quote, rise like lions after slumber in unvanquishable number, shake your chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. You are many, they are few. This poem has been cited by civil rights movements globally, aligning with human rights to peaceful protest. And Article 20 of Universal Declaration of Human Rights codified this right. Again, we have anti-slavery or anti-colonial poetics, in which we have William Cooper's poem, The Task. I would not have a slave to till my ground. And we have post-colonial voices in Derek Walcott and Grace Nicholas. I quote Walcott, The Schooner's Flight. I have Dutch, nigger, and English in me, and either I am nobody or I am a nation. Unquote. We have W.H. Auden, who testimonies war and genocide in his poem, 1939 poem, Refugees Blue. I quote, once we had a country and we thought it fair. Look in the atlas and you'll find it there. We can go there now, my dear, we can go there now. This poem hauntingly embodies the loss of basic human rights, nationality, that is codified in Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 15 and Article 14, and the security in Article 3. We have Caroline Forsyth, the colonel, and I quote, there is no other way to say this. He spilled a sack of human years on the ground. They were like dried peach halves, unquote. The documentary poetry style emphasizes human cost of authoritarian regimes, aligning with Universal Declaration of Human Rights protection from torture and cruel treatment codified in Article 5. We have Benjamin Japania, the poem We Refugees, I quote, I come from a musical place where they shoot me for my song, and my brother has been tortured by my brother in my land. This is about displacement as a shared human possibility. And there is a poet, Warsan Shah, whose poem Home, I quote, No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark, unquote. So here I have given some examples in which we have records of injustice, in which the poetic voice challenges hegemonic power structure and speaks truth to power. I also have prepared a list of, do I have time? How much time do I have?
Yes, please carry on.
Okay. I have list of text of 21st century in which the writers, they have human rights constructions. For example, Chimamanda Adichie's 2006 novel Half a Yellow Sun talks about war, displacement, and refugee rights. It talks about right to life, anti-genocide, refugee rights, humanitarian intervention. It's a novel that reconstructs the Biafran War through intersecting personal narratives, revealing the deep humanitarian crisis caused by war, starvation, displacement, and mass killings. It examines the violation of the rights to life, security, and freedom from persecution. We have The Kite Runner, 2003, by Khalid Hosseini, set in Afghanistan before and during after the Taliban control, and it narrates the impacts of ethnic discrimination, political instability, and forced migration. Their story frames human rights as deeply intertwined with personal and moral responsibility. The focus areas of human rights are refugee rights, minority protection, and freedom from torture. We have Valerie Luzelli's Lost Children Archive, published in 2019. It's a hybrid fiction and a documentary that examines the plight of migrant children crossing the US-Mexico border. The book blends narrative and archival material to critique state policies and deny the right to asylum. The human rights themes are child protection, asylum rights, and statelessness, homelessness. We have Paulson Whitehead in 2016, The Underground Railroad. The novel reimagines the Underground Railroad as a literal network, exposing the brutal realities of slavery and its aftermath in systemic racism. And the human rights themes are abolition of slavery, racial equality, and reparative justice. We have again, in 2019, Whitehead's novel, The Nickel Boys, that critiques state-sanctioned violence and lack of accountability. The human rights themes are protection from cruel treatment, equal protection under the law. We have Ta-Nehisi Coetzee, Between the World and Me, published in 2015, presented as a letter to his son. Coetzee reflects on the embodiment of experience of being Black in America, tying personal weakness to a structural racism. Human rights themes are right to security, racial equality, protection from police violence. We have Bisbee's New Daughters of Africa, 2019, and also Margaret Atwood's 2019, The Testaments. They are about gender equality and women's rights, reproductive rights, freedom of expression, women's empowerment, and freedom of speech. We have Natalie Diaz in 2020, Post-Colonial Love Poem, a poem that confronts colonial violence, environmental exploitation, and erasure of indigenous identity, affirming love and survival as an act of resistance. The human rights themes are indigenous sovereignty, environmental justice, and cultural survival. We have in 2020 again Louis Eldridge's The Night's Watchman. It is based on author's grandfather's activism, addresses the US government's termination policy aimed at dismantling tribal sovereignty. Again, labor rights, indigenous rights, and self-determination are there as human rights theme. We have Richard Wagner's in 2012, Indian Horse. It is a narrative of First Nations boys sent to residential school, exposes systemic cultural genocide through assimilation policies. And the focus is on rights to culture, freedom from degrading treatment. We have books on climate justice and environmental rights. Amitav Ghosh, Gun Island. It is about the Sundarban and a particular kind of dolphins. It is also about environmental degradation and human displacement, and it speaks of right to a healthy environment, climate migration, and ecological justice. In 2018, we have a very important work published by Richard Powers, Over Story. This year on the World Environment Day, I talked about it. It is about it's a Pulitzer Prize winning novel. It portrays the interconnectedness of human and nature, arguing for recognition of environmental rights as inseparable from human rights. The themes are environmental protection and intergenerational justice. We have also LGBTQ rights in Ocean Wong. On Earth, we are briefly gorgeous, a novel written in the form of a letter, narrates queer Vietnamese Americans coming of age, confronting racism and intergenerational trauma, freedom from discrimination, right to love, and the right to immigrate. These are important things. We have The Hungry Ghost, published in 2013 by Shyam Selvadurai. The novel examines the locally Sri Lanka and Canadian context, addressing cultural taboos and systemic prejudice regarding LGBTQ's identity. And it also deals with the themes of diaspora identity and religious tolerance. We have other books related to justice, migration, published in 2019, and I would like to conclude with that literature is not a substitute for legal structures, but it expands the discourse of human rights by making it emotionally compelling, ethically reflective, and culturally grounded. It enables us to imagine a more just world by allowing us to inhabit other lives, others' stories, and voices. As Edward Said noted, quote, humanism is the only, I would go so far as to say, the final resistance we have against the inhuman practices and injustices that disfigure human history, unquote. Literature and human rights are intimately intertwined. They have a symbiotic relationship. Literature bears witness, provokes, heals, and educates. It humanizes statistics, embodies suffering, and keeps hope alive in the darkest of times. In a world increasingly shaped by violence, polarization, and dehumanization, literature reminds us of our shared humanity and our responsibility towards each other. In the resounding words of Pablo Picasso, a work of art must agitate us and shake us up, unquote. Literature is not just a reflection of human rights struggles. It is a weapon, a witness, a healer, and a teacher. It enables us to feel pain of others, recognize injustice, and imagine a more just and humane world. This is how literature is a vehicle for human rights in witnessing, in inspiring empathy and resistance. Why all these matter in human rights discourse? In the 21st century, literature has moved beyond just depicting human rights abuses. It actively constructs frameworks of empathy, resistance, and alternative feature. These works, this is very important because Universal Declaration of Human Rights was framed in 1948, in which certain rights were not mentioned. I feel that certain rights should be mentioned and added to that Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Because these works personalize statistics by humanizing victims, critique systems of law, state, and market, expand definitions of rights to include environmental, cultural, and digital rights. They are not there. Create spaces for marginalized voices in the global canon. Let us continue to read, write, teach, and share literature that speaks truth to power and upholds dignity of all human beings. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Prasad. That was really mind-blowing. It was, what happened? Just one sec, something seems to have gone wrong here. Yeah. Yes, that was really mind-blowing. And I really appreciate the range of your talk. You began with something that, that we expected. You started talking about human rights, and then you brought in all the major writers, the novelists, the poets, and coming down to the present. I mean, it was really a vast sweep. And we're so grateful that you could really, you could bring us back to literature, because sometimes, we end up talking only theory, we end up talking only about human rights, and we forget that Our job is mainly with literature, and it is literature that we want to relate to all the theories that we have been reading. I would request all the participants to come onto the screen so that we can have some discussion, because there are some very senior people logged in here. There is Professor Dhar, Professor Tejnath Dhar, who's logged in from Himachal. And Manpreet is, she's here. Professor Raina, ML Raina has logged in from the US. And yeah, there are others also. I would request them to come onto the screen so that, we can have a discussion and so that you can share your views also. I think this is the best part of our discussions towards the end. When we all come onto the screen, we can look at each other's faces and take part in the discussion. There is this youngster Ishtiaq Ahmed, and incidentally, he's the one who created the poster, and the Gornica idea was his. So you can see Ishtiaq here on the screen. Ishtiaq, a large chunk of the talk today was based on your poster. That is creditable. Yeah.
Thanks, ma'am.
Okay, so we have Debarati and Manpreet out here. Would you like to add to the discussion, Manpreet, Debarati?
Ma'am, I don't think there is, it was like you said, it had such a wide sweep, and it took us back to literature. It was good to, in a way, go through all the novels, which he spoke about. So I don't think there's anything I can really add to it. But yes, I'll just say that it was very interesting. Very interesting. And again, human rights discussed in interesting and through literature, not really going to the laws or the nitty-gritty of it, but yes, very effectively done. Thank you, Professor Prasad.
Thank
Yes.
you very much.
We have Professor Dhar out here. Professor Dhar, good to see you on the screen. Would you like to say something?
After hearing him, I don't think we would dare to say anything, because
Really?
he hasn't left anything for people to say.
I know, and it's commendable how in the span of just 40 minutes, 45 minutes, you managed to bring in so much.
Yeah, that's the whole
You know,
thing.
when you say that literature can intervene into politics, it can shape politics. It sometimes, there are poets who say just the opposite, that poetry makes nothing happen. As Auden, in one of his poems, says, poetry makes nothing happen. But then Auden is the one who tells us of how the poet can raise his voice. All I have is a voice to undo the folded line. And then we have W.B. Yeats also, who says something like, poets have no place in the world because poets are always gay. When there is so many things happening, there can be a war that can break out, and there's so much violence around. And what are poets and painters doing? Nothing. They're just wasting time. It's an idle task. So there are different views on poetry, on literature, but you have made a very strong argument for literature as a vehicle to promote human rights. And the various types of human rights that you brought in, I mean, it's a whole range for us to consider. Yes, Debarati, would you like to say something? Debarati, Sunena, and the others who would like to come onto the screen. It would be very nice to have you join us.
Sir, Professor Prasad, it was so fascinating in terms of, I think you must have mentioned about 100 to 150 texts within a span of 40 minutes or so. So that was absolutely mind-boggling, actually. And the way you did it, I was just trying to understand that the range of the idea of justice, the human rights, and other kinds of justice being brought in together in such a manner. I'm really overwhelmed, sir. Mm.
Thank you.
You brought in race, you brought in LGBTQ, you brought in eco-criticism. I mean, what did you leave out? I was just thinking that what you have delivered just now would make an excellent bibliographical essay, in which you can put in all these writers and expand on their ideas. I think that would be so useful.
Yes.
Yes. Anybody else who
Sir,
would like to? Yeah.
it could turn into a major volume, actually, a major monograph. So have you given it any kind of thought?
I have to do something because I am a reader and I am very lazy in writing. When it comes to writing, I am very lazy. But I read a lot. This I inherited from my grandfather and father. And for this, we have been also being scolded by uh, certain people in the house because we ignore certain things, important things. And so I will think about it. I will.
Yeah, you must think about it. Huh? Maybe we can do something about
Yes.
it. Because we can bring out maybe
We have after coming to Patna in 2019,
yeah.
and I was associated with a NGO that is called Human Rights Association. It was uh, it was constituted before the Human Rights Commission of Bihar was by a very important justice who is no more, Justice Sarwar Ali. The president of this organization is 85 years old person, he is a retired IRS. And we have lots of seminars going on. For example, in 1 year, we do some 15, 16 seminars. The other day we had on tariff, the tariff problem given by Sri Dilip Sinha, who is the chairman of ADRI, and he was ambassador of Greece. He is a senior diplomat. And we have lots of things going on here in that. And it has a very big library of our president's father. He was a chief engineer, and we have very rare books there. So we do lots of seminars, and this is a very good thing for people, certain people like me in Patna, who have got a company to sit and discuss things from religion. On the 5th of September, we have now International School of Management. Yesterday, we met the director, and he readily agreed that we can do some program. We have on the 10th of December, that is Human Rights Day, a very good program. This time maybe on aging, because the number of senior citizens is growing very fast in India and Japan. So this might be a topic.
So all these are in-person events or are they online?
Pardon?
Are they in-person events or are they online?
Online, not successful, but offline.
Okay.
But we are doing something to make it online so that the people outside can
That's right.
benefit.
You can have a wider pool, yeah.
Yes.
Anybody else who would like to speak up? Now I'm going to stop the recording now so that we can have an informal discussion afterwards. So a formal vote of thanks to Professor Anil Prasad. It's very nice that you could join us, and we really appreciate the effort that you put into your talk. The very fact that you put forward so many names, so many authors, so many ideas, approaches, all of them linked with human rights. I think that is commendable. So thank you very much, and we look forward to your participation in our future episodes again.
Thank
So
you.